Thank you so much, Jason, and I'm delighted to be here today. Our friend Stan Lampe has always been a great help to me and has always come through when I've asked him to comment for the series of articles that I've done for the Lane Report over the last couple of years. So when he asked me to do this, I jumped at the chance to sort of return the favor here. And so Stan has asked me to spend a few minutes today talking about road funding alternatives, what other states are doing in that area. And before I get down to business, though, I want to spend just a few moments on how the Council of State Governments, where I work, sort of fits into the transportation policy debate. For those who may not be familiar with CSG, we were founded in 1933, so we celebrated our 75th anniversary back in 2008. We are a member-driven organization that serves all three branches of state government, state and territorial governments, by the way, in the United States, through the services that we offer, which include leadership education, research, and information services. We're led each year by a different governor who serves as our president and a state legislator who serves as our chairman. Puerto Rico Governor Luis Fortuño is our 2012 president, and Kansas Senate Majority Leader Jay Emler is our chairman this year. And one of our recent chairs was actually Kentucky Senate President David Williams. CSG is a national organization with a regional focus. Our headquarters is right here in Lexington. We're out on Ironworks Pike, next door to Spindletop and across from the Horse Park. Come by and see us. We also have an office in Washington, D.C., and our regional offices in New York, Atlanta, Chicago, and Sacramento. So it was back in 2008 that CSG created a transportation policy task force made up of state legislators, State Department of Transportation officials, and private sector associates. The work of the task force, and indeed the bulk of my policy work since then, is focused primarily in two areas: efforts to pass a new surface transportation authorization bill in Washington and the potential impact for states, and then innovation among the states on transportation finance and funding. Our task force is led this year by Minnesota State Representative Alice Hausman and Utah State Senators Kevin Van Tassel, and our vice chair is Virginia Transportation Secretary Sean Connaughton. Among our first orders of business as a task force, our members passed a series of policy resolutions in 2008 and 2009 outlining what state governments would like to see in the next authorization bill. Based on those resolutions, CSG supports an authorization bill that is multimodal, multi-year, and adequately funded to meet the nation's continuing infrastructure needs, provides short-term funding stability and long-term vision, provides maximum flexibility for states, and considers the needs of both urban and rural areas. Our most recent policy resolution passed by our executive committee last year carries forward many of those same concepts and puts CSG on record in support of some guiding principles put forward by our sister organizations, including the National Governors Association, National Conference of State Legislatures, National Association of Counties, and the National League of Cities. These include supporting the continuation of the user pays principle in transportation, having all funding and finance options on the table, supporting federal funding mechanisms designed to maintain reliable long-term funding certainty, supporting preservation of core federal surface transportation programs, and opposing earmarks. So that's a little bit about the perspective CSG comes at these issues from. And before we get into sort of the road funding alternatives at the state level, here's a bit of a refresher about the road funding and finance mechanisms Kentucky already makes use of. And I should note at the outset, too, that Governor Beshear, in announcing what was described in most accounts as an otherwise austere budget this week, cited transportation as perhaps one of the few bright spots. The governor said that the state road fund, which gets much of its money from the state gas tax, is in good shape and growing in a fairly aggressive manner. Revenues are expected to grow for the fourth and fifth years in a row. That's expected to allow the state to increase revenue sharing with local governments and to fund projects in the 6-year highway plan. So as we look at other revenue sources for transportation that are being implemented or contemplated around the country, it's important to note that Kentucky is by no means in panic mode as to how to fund road projects for at least the immediate future. So traditional funding sources in Kentucky, of course, include fuel taxes, motor vehicle and rental car usage taxes, vehicle registration, license and title fees, truck weight fees, interest income, and revenue bonds. Kentucky has also made use of Garvey bonds and Build America bonds. Kentucky is authorized to do design build, though not, as we'll see, public-private partnerships. Kentucky has the weight distance tax. It has made use of the federal and federal aid fund management tool known as advanced construction, and toll credits or soft match, which allows the state to use toll revenues when other state highway funds are not available to meet non-federal share matching requirements. So here are some road funding alternatives that I'll get into in this presentation. I'll take a look at states that are possibly considering increasing their gas taxes. We'll look at sales taxes, fees, tolling, P3s, state infrastructure banks, VMT or mileage-based user fees, and other funding options. There are a number of states that may consider a gas tax increase this year, and up until about a week ago, it appeared that Maryland would be perhaps the surest bet among them. Blue Ribbon Commission there last year recommended a 15-cent increase and that the rate be indexed to inflation. Like a number of states, the gas tax in Maryland hasn't been raised in about 20 years. There appeared to be support from the governor and the legislature, but last week Governor O'Malley sprung a bit of a surprise, suggesting he would prefer a sales tax increase to a gas tax increase. A number of lawmakers have suggested that's a non-starter, however, so a gas tax increase, I guess, could still be the ultimate result down the road. At any rate, a gas tax increase was not included in the governor's budget proposal released yesterday, but could reportedly surface as part of other proposed legislation separate from the budget sometime down the road. So nevertheless, a number of other states, as I said, could consider modifying their state gas taxes this year. California and Colorado, well, who knows? They haven't seen the increases in many years and face major transportation needs there. An advisory commission in Iowa has recommended an increase there. And while Governor Branstad has said he won't push for an increase this year, he has suggested one may be inevitable, and a bipartisan group of legislators appear poised to move forward on their own with an increase. In Michigan, Governor Snyder has a proposal to restructure the gas tax as a percentage of the price of fuel. In Missouri, the state DOT is reportedly exploring the possibility of doubling the state gas tax over 10 years to help pay for the widening of I-70 between St. Louis and Kansas City. And a task force appointed by the governor in Washington state has recommended adding 15 to 20 cents per gallon to the 37.5-cent fuel tax rate there. So where does Kentucky stand with its gas tax? Well, it's currently 26.4 cents per gallon. Unlike in many states, that amount is not static. 10 cents is indexed to the average wholesale price, not to exceed 10% of the tax in any year. Compared to neighboring states, we're higher than most, but not quite as high as Ohio, and not nearly as high as North Carolina at 38.9 cents. Of course, we all know the problems with gas taxes. They're not sustainable. In most cases, they're not indexed to inflation. And due to increased fuel efficiency, higher gas prices, and people driving less, revenues are declining or will likely do so over time. They've also become politically difficult to increase. No state legislature increased a state gas tax in either 2010 or 2011, and only a handful did in either 2008 or 2009. So in light of these shortcomings, what kinds of things are states turning to? Well, one thing they're turning to are sales taxes, and Georgia is a state that a lot of folks will be watching very closely this year. In July, voters will go to the polls to decide whether to increase the state sales tax by a penny to pay for specifically selected projects in each of 12 regions around the state. The thinking behind this approach and the hope is that if you tell folks exactly what they're going to get and what their tax dollars and that their tax dollars won't be subsidizing big city transit projects if they live in the country, for example, they may be more willing to support revenue increases. We'll see if it works. The Georgia Chamber of Commerce is one of the big players making the case in favor of the referendum and the projects the tax increase could finance. So jobs and economic development are a big part of their message, but so too are mobility and congestion relief in the Atlanta area. Anyone who has spent any time stuck in traffic down there will know what a huge issue that is. On the other side, the Tea Party in Georgia is reportedly mobilizing against the referendum, and they actually just called on Governor Deal this month to repeal the law authorizing the referendum, arguing that lawmakers are trying to force Georgians to vote themselves a tax because they didn't have the courage to do it. Governor Deal supports the referendum vote, however. By the way, I have an article coming up in the March issue of our Capital Ideas magazine that will look at the referendum campaign in Georgia. Of course, trying to do something similar in Kentucky is unlikely to happen since local option taxes are currently forbidden by the state constitution, and adding a new tax would require a constitutional amendment. But what's going to happen, what's going on in other states with sales taxes? Well, Arkansas voters will decide in November whether to approve a constitutional amendment that would raise that state's 6% sales tax to 6.5% to fund a $1.8 billion program to connect the state with 4-lane highways. As I said a moment ago, Maryland Governor Martin O'Malley has proposed increasing the sales tax in his state from 6% to 7% as an alternative to a 15-cent gas tax increase. Nebraska will dedicate 1/4 cent from its existing 5-cent sales tax for road projects beginning in 2013. Utah has dedicated 30% growth in sales tax revenue to transportation. And in Virginia, Governor McDonnell has proposed increasing the portion of the sales tax dedicated to transportation incrementally over the next 8 years. A number of states are also looking to increase fees to help fund transportation. That task force I mentioned in Washington State proposed a number of different revenue options to help raise $20 billion over the next decade, including a 10% increase in the gross vehicle weight fee for trucks, as well as a $100 fee for electric vehicles, trying to sort of capture some of the revenues lost since those folks don't pay gas taxes. Governor Gregoire has asked the legislature to consider a $1.50 fee on every barrel of oil refined in Washington. That would raise about 3/4 of the $3.6 billion she says is needed to fund a much more modest 10-year plan she is proposing that would simply maintain existing roads, bridges, and ferries in Washington. So a couple of other states, an advisory commission in Pennsylvania has recommended increasing titling fees, inspection fees, and driver's license fees. Governor Corbett is expected to announce soon whether he'll go along with any of those recommendations. And last year in South Dakota, lawmakers voted to increase license tag fees to help fund maintenance of county, township, and municipal roads and bridges. In doing so, they overrode the governor's veto there. So tolling is also on the rise across the nation, as you know. The state DOT in Florida is seeking authority from state lawmakers to expand the use of toll roads down there. It already has the fourth most number of toll facilities in the nation. As far as the national picture goes, 37 states and Puerto Rico collect at least some toll revenues. Texas has the most toll facilities in the nation at 51. Toll road mileage in the United States increased by 270 miles over the last decade on interstates and by just over 200 miles for non-interstate roads. Last year, Georgia and Virginia both added new highway tolls. Maryland, New York, and New Jersey significantly raised existing tolls. And California, Indiana, Texas, and Washington made it easier to impose tolls on state and local roads. And more tolling is likely on the way. FHWA, the Federal Highway Administration, lists more than 40 proposed toll facilities that are either under consideration or the planning phase. Arizona officials want to toll I-15, which links Nevada and Utah. In Washington State, officials envision adding 300 miles of high-occupancy toll lanes in the years ahead. And in Washington, D.C., HOT lanes are on the way for the Capitol Beltway and I-95. If you're talking about tolling, it's not that far a leap to bring up public-private partnerships, and here our poster child is the Commonwealth of Virginia, which has really made a name for itself in the P3 arena. Virginia has not only a 1995 law on the books that allows them to enter into these agreements. As of last year, it also has a dedicated P3 office that allows them to pursue and manage them. In addition, Virginia has a successful track record from projects already completed, as well as a number that are under construction or in procurement. That's given them a strong institutional knowledge of how to deliver these kinds of projects and allow them to build strong relationships with private sector infrastructure firms, which puts them ahead of many states in that area. In addition to Virginia, only 2 other states, California and Michigan, have dedicated P3 units. 4 others, Oregon, Colorado, Georgia, and Washington, have a P3 office, usually within the state DOT, with personnel that maybe divide their time on other tasks as well. And a recent report from the Brookings Institution outlined 3 recommendations for states to best utilize P3s and get the most out of them. And they included establishing dedicated P3 units to bypass the bottlenecks in the P3 process and to protect the public interest, passing legislation and changing the procurement culture to a more transparent and outcome-based project selection process, and working with the federal government to address technical assistance gaps on P3s on an as-needed basis. So it's no longer simply enough to have P3 authorizing legislation on the books. In order to compete for private sector dollars, states also need to institutionalize and standardize these agreements and processes to a significant degree, rather than doing a project here and a project there on an ad hoc basis. Of course, Kentucky's neighbor to the north, Indiana, was a P3 pioneer with the Indiana Toll Road lease that allowed the state to bankroll a 10-year transportation improvement program called Major Moves. And another neighbor, Ohio, just last year joined the P3 club. Governor Kasich is looking for a lease deal on the Ohio Turnpike. Overall, 31 states and Puerto Rico currently have some type of P3 authority, and Kentucky, of course, is not among them. And as you'll see from this map, the state is literally surrounded by states that have either broad enabling legislation or limited or project-specific legislation. Public-private partnerships encompass more than a dozen project delivery and finance models, ranging from minimal to substantial private sector involvement. One advantage of public-private partnerships is that they can be used to leverage traditional public sector funding. And that is certainly the case with the next item on our list, which is state infrastructure banks. The legislature in Virginia last year created a new SIB to replace their old one. It's a revolving fund that makes loans and provides other financial assistance to localities, certain private entities, and other eligible borrowers, and provides grants to localities to finance transportation projects. Governor McDonnell had wanted an infrastructure bank capitalized at $1 billion. He settled for an SIB with assets of $283 million, about a tenth of that coming from state funds and the rest coming from savings found within the State Department of Transportation's budget. McDonnell wanted the new bank to be totally paid for with state funds because he didn't think the old bank, which used federal money, was measuring up to expectations and state needs. Nationwide, more than 30 states and Puerto Rico have created a state infrastructure bank. Kentucky is not among them. 5 states, including Florida, Georgia, Kansas, Ohio, and Virginia, have established banks or accounts within their banks that are capitalized solely with state funds. Nationally, SIBs have issued almost 700 loans totaling $6.5 billion. Maryland is one of the states currently looking at creating a state infrastructure bank. The Blue Ribbon Commission that I mentioned earlier has recommended considering that. And while several proposals have been floated in Washington to create a national infrastructure bank, the House Republicans' authorization proposal presented last year would instead provide incentives for states to create and capitalize their SIBs. So if that proposal were to move forward, it could perhaps benefit the states that already have established SIBs. Of course, ultimately, as I indicated earlier, declining gas tax revenues may require shifting to a different kind of revenue source, one that is more sustainable and that better reflects the impact of all vehicles on the nation's roads. And one oft-mentioned solution is a vehicle miles traveled or mileage-based user fee. Minnesota is one of the most recent states to experiment in this arena. A pilot program begun last May will be complete by the end of this year. And a group of 500 drivers from 2 counties in Minnesota are being asked to test a VMT collection system that uses smartphones and GPS technology to submit mileage information to the State Department of Transportation. At the same time, a task force charged with considering the implications of implementing a VMT system has reported that while such a fee could be fair and flexible, it should not be implemented until certain concerns are satisfactorily addressed. And those would include privacy, administrative cost, complexity, how the system could be phased in, and unfamiliarity with the concept among policymakers and the public. So no state has passed legislation to implement a VMT system or fee, though about 24 have examined the feasibility of such a system over the last decade. Oregon conducted the original VMT pilot program in 2007 and conducted a Phase 2 pilot program last year that, instead of relying on a pay-at-the-pump concept, allowed drivers to choose the method by which they report their mileage and pay their fees. In addition, Nevada completed a feasibility study in 2010, which indicated that it could take a decade or more to fully phase in a VMT fee program. Legislation to implement other pilot projects or feasibility studies has had varying degrees of success in states such as Colorado, Texas, Hawaii, and Massachusetts. A federally funded multi-state VMT field test conducted by the University of Iowa was recently completed as well. So is VMT likely to be a replacement for the gas tax? Well, 2 federal transportation commissions have recommended moving in that direction. And last year, the Congressional Budget Office said a VMT system could be a feasible transportation funding option and would result in a more efficient use of the highway system. Most analysts agree, however, that more research will be needed and that there are still significant technological, administrative, public education, and privacy concerns to be resolved. Implementation could begin with electric cars exclusively, as has been proposed in Colorado and other states. And by the way, our friend Stan Lampe and KBT would like to see Kentucky be involved in determining if VMT is a potential solution. Here's a quote I borrowed from a recent KBT newsletter. It's pointless to blame the federal government or wait on other states to do this research and analysis for us. Let's resolve in 2012 that we will study a driver-friendly opt-in VMT program for Kentucky drivers. Our surface transportation system and our public transit systems are too important to wait on others to find answers for us. So that's from KBT. So just quickly, a couple of other funding options. Value capture arrangements may be one thing states will be looking at in the years ahead. As if Virginia weren't already doing quite a bit from audits that turned up unused funds to a dedicated P3 office, as I mentioned, to a revamped infrastructure bank. Governor McDonnell is also pushing a new idea this year, namely a version of tax increment financing at the state level, which would dedicate portions of tax revenue growth attributable to transportation infrastructure projects back to transportation. That would be somewhat unique and innovative, since it is something normally done at the local level to pay debt service on the infrastructure. There is some question about how the state would capture tax revenue that's already theirs for transportation projects they initiate. There's also a concern that local governments might revolt if they determine they stand to lose their share of taxes from a project. Finally, a couple of other stats about what some other states are doing that we haven't touched on yet. 15 states in Puerto Rico place a sales tax on gasoline or diesel fuel, and 23 states use fees generated by traffic cameras as a revenue source. And before I conclude and see if I can answer any of your questions, here's how you can get hold of me. You can find my blog on the CSG Knowledge Center, which is the one-stop shop on our website for all of our policy work that we do. CSG.org/transportation is where you'll find my work. My recent publications have included a blog post on 13 states to watch on transportation in 2012. You can also find my top 5 transportation issues for 2012 brief, which I have some copies on the back table if they're still there. And that just came out last week. And coming up in March, as I said, we've got a special issue of our Capital Ideas magazine coming out that will focus on transportation and infrastructure. You can also follow me on Twitter, @CSG Transport is my handle there. And I'm about to head to DC for the Transportation Research Board annual meeting, so you may see a few tweets from me from there in a couple of days. And I'll have full coverage when I get back in the Capital Ideas e-newsletter, which you can also subscribe to online.